And we are live. Good morning. Thank you to those of you that are watching. Thank you to those of you that are coming in after the live stream has posted. You're watching the replay. My name is Sherri Downs. This is the Healing Room. And today we are hosting Annie Safe Haven, which is a domestic violence agency and support group supporting those who are impacted by and who has experienced domestic violence. We were on here, I think that was February, doing an online training and education to educate and bring awareness to the area of domestic violence. And today, again, we have with us Heather Dropsky, who is a licensed counselor, and Candace White, who is a certified domestic violence trainer. And she is here. They both are here to help us, empower us, and give us all of their expertise and education so that we can know and are aware of what domestic violence looks like and how to help those that are around us who may be experiencing or have been impacted by domestic violence. Today, I'm going to hand you over to Heather Dropsky. For those of you that are new, my name is Sherri Downs. I am a conference host, a speaker, a women's empowerment coach, a author, an entrepreneur, a lover of Jesus Christ. And we are just spreading this education and teaching concerning domestic violence because this is a burden that the Lord has put on our heart. And so we are sharing this information with those that may be in need. Hey, before I turn it over to Heather so she can take us further into today's teaching, I want to make you aware of a Christmas giveaway that we have been doing for the last 3 years called Annie's Safe Haven. And this is a cause that we do through Annie's Safe Haven, and it's to bring awareness to those who have been impacted by domestic violence. So we are getting ready to launch our partnerships so that you can partner with us to bring hope to those who have been impacted by domestic violence. So this is our 3rd year going. Last year, we were able to be a blessing to 5 single moms in giving Christmas gifts and finances to 5 single moms. And this year we want to do even more. So with you partnering with us by going to anniesafehaven.com/donate, we can reach more individuals and bring hope to more families. All right. Also, July 27th, I, Sherri Downs, am launching a course titled Grow Woman. And this course is designed to empower and to edify and build up women who have maybe experienced emotional trauma or any form of trauma, to build you up in several different areas of your life. You can find all of that information on my website, and you can find it on my Facebook page and on my YouTube page. All right, now that I have said all of those things, Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us further into this teaching in the area of domestic violence.
Okay, thank you, Sherri. So today, the title of our talk is Domestic Violence. It can happen to anyone. So I've been a counselor. A little bit about my background. I've been a counselor for 26 years, and I have counseled women going through domestic violence. I've also counseled children with domestic violence in the home. And even along the way, I've counseled a few men going through it as well. So I'd like to first start out with a few statistics. And you may be pretty shocked when you hear these. So right now in the USA, 1 in 3 people of both or all genders experience domestic violence in their lifetime. So this is according to the Doorways organization. Okay, a few demographics also. Black and Indigenous women of color are the most affected by this domestic violence. And also women of color are the most likely to not only be abused, but also even killed through domestic violence. Also the LGBTQ community by domestic violence as well as people with disabilities. So, and mainly with the people with disabilities, it's women who rely on the abusers for their daily care. To factor in, there's systematic bias, there's financial control, there's isolation. That's another big piece of it. A few more stats before we get into the types of abuse. I just want to touch on that lightly today. 45% of domestic violence survivors stay with the abusive partner. Okay, a lot of times it's because they have nowhere to go or they lack the resources. So again, over 12 million people just in the USA are affected by domestic violence every year, according to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And I would like to share the hotline as I talk, and I'll be sharing the hotline throughout this presentation. So it's pretty easy to remember. The National Domestic 799 SAFE. And I don't have it in the slide presentation, but I will be mentioning that throughout the presentation today, because if you are suffering with domestic violence, if you suspect a loved one or someone you know is suffering with domestic violence, it's important to give them a call and get resources. Okay, so again, it's 1-800-799-SAFE. Okay, so we are going to get into the types of abuse briefly. So with the types of abuse, there's all different types of abuse. A lot of times we think of domestic violence and we just think of the physical abuse. But there's so much more to this. And I'm going to keep it PG-13 today. So let's go through the first one. It's physical abuse. So that could be hitting. It could also be biting. It could be choking, pulling hair. So any type of physical aggression that's perpetrated towards the other individual. Okay, so definitely physical. And that's the one we most think of when we think of domestic violence. But it could also be of the sexual nature as well. So this could be demanding or forcing intimacy on somebody and forced to watch certain sexually inappropriate types of videos, things like that. Again, I'm keeping it PG-13. So that's another type of abuse. There's also, this is what I see a lot of in my office, emotional abuse. And that can be just isolating the person. I see so much of that counseling where, and I counsel women and children. That's the population currently that I counsel at my practice. A lot of the women I see are so isolated from their family and friends. So a lot of times what the abusers do is they get the woman isolated so the woman does not have that support that they need to leave that person, because there's a control factor with the abuser, which we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. A lot of times too with emotional abuse, the abuser is extremely jealous. They're also very insulting. They gaslight the person. So gaslighting is when someone is told something contrary to the truth, even though there are a ton of facts backing it up. You know, for example, someone might say, I'm going to be home late tomorrow night. and the person says, oh, you never told me you were going to be late tomorrow night. And that can start a huge domestic violence situation. So there's blaming. There's also withholding affection. That can be under this umbrella with emotional abuse. And then accusing the person of being unfaithful, infidelity, cheating. So there's a lot to the emotional abuse, and I see a lot of that in my office. Number 4, there's financial abuse that goes on. Sometimes it's giving the person an allowance, denying access to funds. I've had women that I've counseled who've not had access to the bank account. I've also had women who have actually been on disability, and it goes right into their partner's bank account where they cannot even see what they're getting as far as their own finances. So that's a big thing as well. A lot of times they force their partner to give them money, or the abuser refuses to work as well. I see that where the women or men are refused to kind of go out and work above and beyond their means. So there's a lot with financial abuse. And I've got 2 more for types of abuse. I've got digital abuse. So this can be anything from putting spyware on the partner's computer, putting a tracker device on their cars. I've seen that in therapy as well. Getting the passwords, monitoring the person's social media and texts, and also demand for explicit pictures from that person. And then the last type of abuse is reproductive abuse, and that's refusing birth control. That is sabotaging the birth control methods, and it's causing the partner guilt for not wanting children. So all this to say, all of this can be umbrellaed under the topic of domestic violence, things we don't think of as being violent per se. So many of these abuses, and I see it all the time, abusers, I always, it's not really a joke, but I kid around and I say abusers, they play by the same playbook. They really do, because there's patterns, there's behavioral patterns with this. Many of all of these abuses that I just talked about, they're combined. So many times you don't have just one type of abuse. You might have physical abuse with emotional abuse and the financial. So there's, different combinations of that. Okay. And then threats and intimidation. Yeah, as well. Okay. So we're going to go to the next slide here. Okay. A lot of times I see my clients get stuck in abusive cycles. Many do not realize that it's abuse. A lot of times when I'm talking to the women who are in these situations, they don't realize that, it's not normal to be called names. It's not normal to have your finances controlled. So a lot of times through therapy, they come to me, a lot of times the women, and it's not they're coming to me thinking they're being abused. They're coming to me because they have anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, problems with body image. And then as we start unpacking things, pulling back the layers, we realize, it's the core root of a lot of these mental health problems are because they are being abused. There's domestic violence going on in the situation. So there's that. So there's some common themes with the person being abused. I think that's on the next slide, possibly. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I got to finish that. Oh, can we go back one, please? Okay. Yeah, a lot of times these are some of the common themes. So a lot of times there's low self-esteem with the person getting abused. They're isolated from their friends or family. They think abuse equals love. And many times it's because the person has grown up in a domestic violence home themselves. I myself, I was brought up in a home with domestic violence. And as a young woman, I ended up as a young woman getting into some domestic violence relationships with boyfriends. So it happens because a lot of times when you grow up in that situation, you think that's normal. How you see mom and dad interacting, and you think that's normal, and you don't know better. I once heard someone say, you do better when you know better. I really believe that with my whole heart. So a lot of the women coming in for counseling, we're trying to kind of find normal for them. So a lot of times too, with religion, because I do Christian counseling, I also do secular counseling, but a lot of times many Christian women get the impression that they need to submit to their husband no matter what. Now, in the Bible, it does say we are to submit to our husbands, but not if we're getting abused. We need to get help. It might be seeking out your pastor. It might be seeking out a Christian counselor, but we need to really look at that as well. There's also, we just did that one. There's also immigrants. Okay, a lot of times immigrants kind of stick in the cycle as well. And that's real tough because a lot of times people lack the resources. And that's why and we'll go back to Annie Safe Haven. That's why this organization is so important and so needed, because people need resources. People need the resources and the love and care to leave the situation. Okay, so I think we're on to the next slide here. All right, so what do we got here? So these are traits of the abuser. Okay, so we got to think of that too. So these are kind of just some generalized traits of what the abuser in a domestic violence situation, what it can look like. So number one, we've got the history of being abused themselves. So yes, a lot of times they grew up in domestic violence situations themselves and they haven't got help for it. They haven't healed. And a lot of times they carry on what they grew up in into their adult relationships. Number two, a lot of times they have a lack of coping skills, anger management, distress tolerance skills. A lot of times they lack these. So when they get upset with their partner, they just blow up and explode and yell, call names, hit everything we just talked about. And number three on that slide was a lot of times they have a mental health diagnosis. And I can't sit here and say it's one particular diagnosis, because a lot of times, it could be attachment disorders, it could be personality disorders, it could be a whole plethora of different disorders. But a lot of times the person perpetrating the abuse, they're struggling with their own mental health.
Now, Heather, this abusive relationship is not just confined to partner abuse. We talked about the types of abuse, but this abuse can happen from parent to child. Yes. It can happen from grandmother to grandchild. It can happen from siblings. It can happen in any dynamic of domestic relationships. So sometimes when people think about domestic violence, they immediately go to spouses or girlfriend, boyfriend. They immediately think in that regard, but domestic violence could even be parent to child. And sometimes when a parent is exhibiting all of these behaviors that you're mentioning here, that child is experiencing domestic violence. Because a parent can lack coping skills. A parent themselves can have a history of being abused. A parent can experience mental illness. A parent can have a history of criminal behavior. And lastly, a parent can have a drug addiction. So all of these dynamics can happen in any shape or form within a domestic relationship. So we want to highlight that for people, so people don't automatically assume that, oh, it's my boyfriend that's supposed to be the one that is causing me harm. No, it can be any form of violence that you are experiencing within that domestic relationship. And this, because we are believers, is a result of the fall of humanity. And when humanity and people that you are in relationship with, when their hearts are back aligned with the Lord Jesus in a healthy way, because some people, they believe they have had a spiritual awakening, but they still have symptoms of the fall. But when we have a healthy, right relationship with Jesus Christ, we will see each other as God's treasured possession, as the scriptures say that we are, and we will begin to treat one another as such. Even our children, just because we have children doesn't mean we have a right to abuse them in any way. And so that is verbal, mental, sexual, financially, in any capacity in with relationships in our lives. That can also stem from spiritual father to spiritual daughter, spiritual daughter to spiritual father. All of these dynamics in which we deem familial relationships, we have to be so careful as to not take our role and our positions in people's lives and use that as a gateway of abuse. A form of abuse, you mentioned it a little bit. You talked about gaslighting. Gaslighting can be also where you causing someone to second guess their reality, their choices, their autonomy, and just in general, their personhood and the decisions that they're making, causing them to be less confident in decisions and the things that they are holding to as reality. And so I think it's important to highlight these things as we are moving forward through this teaching and through this form of awareness of what domestic violence really looks like, because some people overlook that part. And like in your experience, Candace and Heather, your professional experience, do you see that where people that you may have talked with didn't even realize, outside of the context of husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, maybe it was a parent or a child, maybe it was a grandmother or grandma, a father, maybe it was siblings, that they didn't even realize they were experiencing domestic violence? I guess we can start to that.
I want to jump in really quick. Yes, I have seen that where people didn't realize that it could happen in certain relationships, like you said, brother sister. It could be cousin, it could be on the job, it could be in the church, pastor to member. It can be so many different dynamics. And I've also seen that people, when they hear about domestic violence, they only think of it as just physical. But again, throughout the conversation today, we talked about it could be financial abuse, spiritual, emotional. So there are many facets of abuse that people don't realize that can be domestic violence outside of just the physical. We see those outward appearances of hits or bruises or scratches or scrapes, but abuse can manifest in so many different ways, and I'm glad we're having that conversation today.
Because abuse can happen to anyone. It
Yeah.
can happen to anyone at any point in any time. But when it's happening, each person has to be educated enough to know what is taking place.
Very true. And I see that a lot with the children that I counsel in the situations. A lot of times the kids will come to me and tell me some of these things. I want to throw another 1-800 number. If you know any children that are getting abused and they tell you they're getting abused, it's another simple one. It's 1-800-25-ABUSE. And that's the DC. I don't have it in the slide. I'm sorry. But it's 1-800-25-ABUSE. And that's DCFS. And they are
Very good.
Yeah, and I worked for them long ago, and they're mandated when they get an abuse report, their job is to go out within 24 hours and investigate. So if you call in and you think, well, it'll be a founded case immediately, no, they're just going to do an investigation. And then when the investigation's over, then it's either founded or not founded. But the important thing is to call that 1-800 number if a child's telling you they're being abused. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I want to just jump in here and share. Annie Safe Haven is a domestic violence support agency, and you can go and donate and become a partner at www.anniesafehaven.com/donate. You can go to anniesafehaven.com/donate and to be a part of what we are building and the education and trainings that we are creating, and the spaces of giving hope for the holidays, being a blessing to single mothers this holiday season. We can pick up where we were left off talking about.
Okay, I think we're on the next slide.
The next slide.
I think the history of the criminal behavior. Yeah, we covered that. So like Sherri was saying, like domestic violence, it could be to anybody. That's what the whole title of the seminar is. It's not just romantic relationships. It can be elderly people. So I want to hover here for a minute because this is a very much overlooked population. So statistically, 10% of elderly people are being abused. And again, it can be all the different types of abuse that we just talked about. And could the slide back up, please? Yeah, it could be the physical. It could be even sexual, emotional. Another thing with the elderly, it can be neglect. So that's a lot of times when people are elderly, they are disabled. They're not in the best health. And with that, it could be they have caretakers. A lot of times their family is taking care of them. And that's where the abuse can occur, by the family that's taking care of them. So with the neglect, it could be neglecting their needs for food, clothing, medication, even withholding health care from them. Another thing, they can financially abuse the elderly. I see that a lot, where they are just getting financially abused even by their own children. They're withholding the money from the elderly person, or they're spending it all. It's just really bad. Abandonment too. A lot of times when the elderly are entrusted to their caregivers, they could be left alone and it's not a safe situation. A lot of times they could be a high fall risk, or even mentally compromised, dementia, things like that. And the family can leave them alone and it's not safe. So there's some signs with the elderly, and it's a little bit different than with younger people. A lot of times with the elderly, they can be withdrawn, depressed. You want to look for quick changes in their finances. If all of a sudden, let's say you've got an elderly uncle who's pretty well off, and all of a sudden he's saying he doesn't have the financial means to go get a haircut. I'm just off the top of my head making something up. And he tells you, I don't have the money to go get a haircut or go buy my groceries. And you want to look for these things. Poor hygiene, you can see that. Bed sores, weight loss, non-compliance with their medication or their medical treatment, and even unexplained bruises and broken bones with the elderlies. with elderly people. Yeah. So again, like Sherri said, we don't want to overlook anybody in the family, the children, the adults, and even the family. So, yeah. Okay, and we went through that. Yeah, we just went through that one. So I think we're on to the next slide. Okay, so we'll talk about the kiddos for a little bit here. So this is such a very sad statistic. 45 million of children are exposed to domestic violence. You know, and I want to pause there because as we go through these stats, you know, we're talking about all these stats just to give everybody an overview of how prevalent it is. But these stats, unfortunately, are mainly inaccurate because 40 to 50% of people in domestic violence situations, it's not being reported to law enforcement. So we got to take these statistics lightly and think of the statistics most likely to be so much more than what we're seeing today, what we're reading about on the internet. So why? Let's talk about that. Why do people not, I'm going to hop into the children after I talk about this. So they're really, a lot of times they're not reporting it. I see this with the ladies that I counsel because they are protecting the offender. They're protecting the abuser because they are sometimes scared of them, or they're even in a very codependent or addictive relationship with that person. A lot of times with domestic violence too, it goes unreported because there's a lot of shame with it. You know, for the children, for the parents, whoever is experiencing it, there's a lot of shame and fear. And also a lot of times there's lack of trust in law enforcement. So we see that a lot of times people grow up in situations where they don't see the police as being safe or even, you know, just going to report things that need to be reported. So there is the lack of trust in the law enforcement system. So men, a lot of times men, they don't report it because there's a lot of times a different type of stigma associated with a man being abused, let's say, by a woman in a romantic situation. So yeah, and a lot of times, like we talked about earlier, there's a lack of even realizing it's abuse. So that's why it's going unreported. So there's all these reasons why it goes unreported. That's why take these stats lightly today, what you see, what you hear on the internet, because so much 40 to 50% of it goes unreported.
And sometimes, Heather, there's back and forth abuse. They're abusing each other.
Correct.
So sometimes it's not reported because it's a give and take. And so that person is not going to report because they're also lashing back out. Or you mentioned a codependency. What about trauma bonding?
Yes, you see that too. So that's like people who've been through trauma. And like one person says, oh yeah, I was abused by a child, by my parent. The other person says, oh, my mom or dad was an alcoholic and they neglected me. And so it can be a combination of abuses that people can trauma bond over as well. Just really unhealthy, you know, and that's where we go back to the cycles of abuse. They stay, and then sometimes they get out of it temporarily and then they go back. So it's really common for people to leave a situation and go back to it a few times before they finally get the strength, right? Spiritually and emotionally to break the tie.
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll go back to if we've got time, we could go back to the slide about the children. I think that's the next one. Okay. So yeah, like we just saw, there's 45 million that are exposed to domestic violence. And this is very sad. 90% of kids in domestic violence homes actually see it. They see and I grew up in a home like this. They see their parents physically coming at each other. Sometimes police are called to the home. There's just so much shame involved with that as well for the children, and fear and attachment disorders. And I can go on and on, a whole laundry list of diagnoses that can happen when kids are exposed to domestic violence.
And so that dispels the myth of children are resilient, because in your slide, you mentioned the results are often anxiety, depression, CP, TSD, substance abuse, trouble with peers. And so oftentimes you'll hear, well, children are resilient, but no, because that child that experienced that becomes the adult that now has issues. And so children are not resilient. Children just learn to adapt to their environment. And sometimes the results or the effects of what they are experiencing goes unattended. And so then that child then becomes an adult that is not functioning at the capacity that they should as a healthy and whole individual.
Correct. Yes, for
And
sure.
some things we see too, to kind of go along with that, conversation, we see the grades kind of fall behind. So that straight A student you might see, coming to class, you might see a sudden drop in their grades. You might see a student who is very outgoing, you might see them kind of reserved and off to themselves. And then sometimes you might even see a kid who gets along with everyone starts becoming the bully in school. So there's a lot of different things and character changes you see with kids who experience violence in the home.
That's good.
Yeah, that's very correct. It's sometimes the child is not getting abused, but sometimes they're just witnessing mom and dad. They're witnessing the domestic violence, but mom or dad, they're not abusing the child, but they still have these same these negative effects happen to the child just by witnessing it. Yeah. And the CPTSD, I don't want to get into like real clinical things, but that's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So PTSD isn't just for people who've gone and served in wars.
Right.
They're finding out kind of a newer diagnosis is CPTSD. And that's complex. And that can come from just emotional abuse even. You can have PTSD from just being, I shouldn't say just, but from being emotionally abused.
Right. Any form of trauma, you can have, situations that rock your nervous system, throw you off, change your reality. Moving all the time can cause PTSD. It's so many different things that years ago we weren't able to pinpoint and understand concerning the human makeup and brain and how it works and how it affects everyday living. But now technology and understanding how the psyche works has advanced. And so we're able to treat people and diagnose people in a way that has clear specifics than what we were able to do years ago.
Yes. Yeah. When I started out counseling complex post-traumatic stress disorder, that didn't even exist.
Yeah.
When I first started and went to school. So it's kind of newer science because we're learning more about the brain. And so, yeah. So I think we're on to the next slide. Okay. So this is kind of our wrap up here. So remember, it can happen to anyone. That's the takeaway. So if you see these signs that we talked about, we want to be prepared to intervene. Okay. And we can either call 1-800-799-SAFE. It's the abuse hotline. If it's a child, we call 1-800-25-ABUSE. That's DCFS. Okay. And I think we're back to the slide again. Okay, because this is our wrap here. Yeah, so the first measure is to take is creating a safety plan. So that, boy, that can be so much with creating a safety plan for the person for when they leave and or just being safe in the home. I've counseled a few women where we actually had them make separate sets of home and car keys and hide them somewhere, or get a burn. I know this sounds like way out there, but get a burner phone, get an extra phone, and keep it somewhere that abuser doesn't know where these items are at. So if they do get in a situation that's very unsafe, they have a way to leave. They have a way to call somebody, and they have a way to, get into the car and get out of there. I've had people even go, it sounds ridiculous, but even bury a set of car keys out in the yard somewhere, just to keep it away from the partner who's abusing them, so they could get out if they needed to. And with the safety plan, not only that, is when they finally do leave, they need to be safe. And a lot of times they'll go to places where that abuser, they do not know their location. So a lot of times that's very important too, to keep the person safe. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in understanding abuse can happen to anyone, it can happen in many different degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So where one is an extreme, blatant form of abuse, something can be a subtle form of abuse that someone doesn't even realize is abuse. So we have to be so discerning and understand what healthy relationship looks like. I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of people don't know what healthy relationship looks like. So they think talking down to someone, even in friendships, I see a lot of people calling their friends bad names. That's not healthy.
No.
It's not healthy to be calling your friend a bad name, calling people stupid, derogatory names, all of these things that damage the psyche of or the well-being of someone else, whether that's physical, mental, emotional, relational, whatever context. If it damages the well-being, or if it's words of death, it's a form of abuse, and it's unhealthy. So if you're watching and you're one of those people, you call your girlfriend derogatory names, you call your children little so-and-sos, that is not healthy. That is not a healthy way of communicating. It's not a healthy way of being in a relationship with anyone. And so I just don't get it, to where people think that these things are okay. And then when someone stands up and says, no, you're not going to call me that. Well, I call all of my friends that. Well, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. It's unhealthy. You shouldn't call all your friends that. You shouldn't call your children that. You shouldn't speak to someone in that manner. And so I think if we educate more people on what healthy relationship looks like, because they don't come from healthy relationships, or they've never seen a healthy relationship. And so they don't know how to model that in reality. And then when someone is broken in themselves, they have a high probability of breaking other people. I know that there's a term in the DV arena that the abuser becomes the abused becomes the abuser. And so when people have experienced a lot of these things, they tend to repeat those patterns, but someone needs to stand up. And if you're watching and you have been impacted by domestic violence, you have been impacted by relationships that are not for your whole well-being, whether that's spiritual, natural, friendships, boss to worker, whatever relationship that you have that is not lending to your physical, mental health, emotional, financial well-being of the whole person, then you probably need to assess that relationship and make some plans to exit left. Exit left, get out of that relationship, or bring that relationship before the Lord and ask God for wisdom on how you should proceed. I just wanted to say that because this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, in so many different dimensions of just healthy communication, healthy relationship, respecting and honoring the people that we are in relationship, respecting people as a human being. Like, because life is so short and it's precious. There are so many people that are dying quick, fast, and in a hurry these days. It's happening so rapid all across the world. And it's like humanity is being desensitized to death because we see it every day. It's like it's something that's not even phasing us, but we really have to take this seriously and begin to open our eyes and begin to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. So thank you, ladies, for sharing all of your expertise. I'll stop talking so you can finish this up, Heather.
I believe that was it. I believe that was the ending.
Okay, so last words. Thank you, Candace, for joining us. Candace led out our last session, and so we just needed her expertise on here again. Any last words, encouragement, just some things that you can share to enlighten us?
Yes, I just want to just kind of reiterate again, it can happen to anyone. So it doesn't matter your race, your gender, your social, economic status, your orientation. It doesn't matter what you look like or um or the things that you've experienced. It doesn't even matter how much money you have. It can happen to anyone at any time, at any place. So just understanding the knowledge that we've gained and the tools that we've gained, using those tools and understanding if you are in a domestically violent relationship, again, like our host Sherri said, taking it up before the Lord or finding an exit plan to get out of that relationship safely. Those are the tools that we need to continue to learn. And then also that process of unlearning. If you are someone who is perpetrating violence or causing violence in those relationships, unlearning those toxic and those negative behaviors so you won't continue to harm the next person you're in the relationship or continue to harm the person you are in a relationship with. So again, with life, the process of learning and unlearning, we need to be sensitive to that. But I enjoyed everything that I heard today, and I really love this conversation because it allows us to have that education and that conversation of, hey, if it's happening to you, you don't have to feel ashamed, you don't have to feel embarrassed. There are tools, there are resources, there are people out here to help. So I love having this conversation and kind of ending that stigma of we can't talk about it. Sometimes we come from backgrounds and relationships where what happens in the home stays in the home. We can't talk about it to our mother, we can't talk about it to our church. We're scared to open up about it. But I just want to encourage you all, it's nothing to be afraid of or ashamed of. There are resources out here to help.
Very good. Heather, you have any last words?
Well, I just saying what Candace just said, just encouraging anybody who's looking at this today and thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was abuse, right? And whether it's blatant or not, reaching out and getting help, because there's resources. There's Annie's Safe Haven, which is a great resource to start at, and people that love you and care about you and want your best, right? That's what Annie's Safe Haven is all about. And also, if you feel you're very unsafe and you need help right away, again, calling that 1-800-799-SAFE or 1-800-25-ABUSE for the kiddos. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, ladies. Again, thank you for partnering with us. Those of you that this may be a topic near and dear to your heart, you can go to anniesafehaven.com/donate to partner with Annie Safe Haven Inc., which is a domestic violence support and a support agency group, so advocacy and support group. And so we are gathering partners who will be helping us for the Christmas holiday. We are starting early to gather partners so we can help as many families as possible for the holiday season with Christmas giving and finances to just bring them hope for the holidays. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for those that may be watching this replay. Share this to your timeline, your network, and always, we love you with the love of the Lord, and we love you with our love. If you are a part of our coaching community, Touchdowns Enterprise, you are invited to join us for our Grow Woman e-course starting July 27th. And a lot of these topics that we talked about today, we will also be dealing with on the Grow Woman's e-course. Go to my website, www.touchdownsenterprise.com, and register for the Grow Woman course. All right. Have a wonderful Saturday, and thank you for joining.
Thank you, ladies.